When awareness stirs and the heart opens to the sacred realization of the infinite presence within, a subtle yet profound transformation begins. You sense that life is no longer something happening to you. It flows through you, as you. The struggle of seeking, striving, and becoming fades, for you begin to glimpse that the source you have sought has never been absent. The veil of separation, woven of fear, desire, and self-judgment, dissolves in the light of a quiet knowing that you are, and always have been, one with the eternal. In this awakening, the words that once seemed distant or symbolic now breathe with living essence. The declaration, "I am no longer," echoes as mere sound or doctrine. It vibrates as the living word within your own being. It is the pulse of divine awareness recognizing itself through you. You begin to perceive that all that exists, all that lives and moves and has being, arises from this same radiant center. The boundaries between you and the world soften. Peace arises not from circumstance, but from recognition. With this realization, fear loses its authority. You no longer chase after outer forms to secure your worth or identity. You understand that the abundance of life, the healing power of love, the wisdom to act rightly are already present in the stillness of your being. In the silence, you hear the voice that says, "Be still and know that I am." That knowing becomes your resting place. As the light deepens, compassion unfolds naturally. You see others not as strangers or adversaries, but as expressions of the same eternal presence. You no longer react to appearances, you respond from the heart of being. Every encounter becomes a reflection of the infinite meeting itself. Judgment gives way to understanding, and peace becomes not a goal, but the very fabric of awareness. In this awakened state, life is not a series of problems to be solved, but a mystery to be revealed. You live not by effort, but by grace. Every breath carries the quiet assurance that the presence which lives as you is complete, unchanging, and eternally free. What changes then is not the world, but your vision of it, transformed by the light of I am shining where once there was only seeking. Awakening to the inner presence. True transformation begins when one realizes that the divine source has always been within. Life is not external, but flows through and as you. The living meaning of I am, the phrase ceases to be a concept or teaching and becomes a direct experience of divine awareness recognizing itself in you. Freedom from fear and striving. When the presence is known, fear, lack, and striving lose their hold. Abundance, wisdom, and peace arise naturally from within. Compassion through oneness. Seeing all beings as expressions of the same infinite dissolves judgment and separation, allowing love and understanding to guide every action. Living by grace, not effort. In awakened consciousness, life unfolds effortlessly. The world does not change, but one's perception of it is illumined by the light of I am. When the veil of unconscious living begins to thin, something subtle stirs deep within, a gentle recognition that life is not what we thought it to be. We begin to sense that what we have been searching for through effort, study, or devotion has been quietly present all along, hidden behind the noise of our own thoughts and desires. Awakening to the inner presence is not a moment of achievement or arrival. It is the dawning of remembrance. It is the rediscovery of that which has never been lost. The mind, long accustomed to seeking satisfaction in things, people, and circumstances, slowly becomes still enough to perceive a presence that is not dependent upon anything external. This awakening does not come through argument or belief. It unfolds in the silence of awareness itself. There is no sudden addition to your being, no external light descending from elsewhere. Rather, there is a soft unveiling of what has always been, the life within you that is eternal, changeless, and whole. As the mind loosens its grip on the outer, the heart begins to open to the inner reality that breathes through all things. You realize that you are not living apart from the source of life, you are that life expressing itself as form and consciousness. In this recognition, the world begins to look different, though it remains the same. The same faces, the same challenges, the same routines, yet there is a quiet radiance behind them all. You no longer see yourself as a separate being moving through a hostile or indifferent universe. Instead, you begin to sense a rhythm of harmony sustaining all things. The wind through the trees, the beating of your heart, the rising and setting of the sun, all are movements of the same presence revealing itself. You start to live in a sacred rhythm, and even the simplest acts of daily life carry a fragrance of meaning. To awaken inwardly is to cease identifying with the surface of experience, the ever-shifting emotions, the roles you play, the successes and failures that once defined you. You begin to notice that behind every thought and feeling there is a still awareness, untouched and unmoved. That awareness is the real you. It is not something you possess. It is what you are before you think, before you act, before you seek. When you rest in that realization, peace becomes natural, effortless, uncontrived. You no longer need to control life, for you sense that life itself is intelligent and self-unfolding. The awakening of inner presence also changes the way you relate to others. You no longer see people as separate personalities to be judged or fixed, but as reflections of the same divine life. Even in moments of conflict or misunderstanding, you begin to sense a quiet invitation to look beyond appearances. Compassion rises not as a moral effort, but as a spontaneous recognition. The same life that beats in your heart beats in theirs. From this awareness, true, forgiveness flows, not as an act of will, but as the natural fragrance of understanding. There is a sacred humility that comes with this realization. The need to prove, to compete, to assert begins to fall away. You see that all striving to become something greater than what you are is built upon a false premise, that you are somehow incomplete. In truth, you cannot add anything to the fullness of what already is. You awaken to a presence that needs nothing, fears nothing, and lacks nothing. It is the quiet strength that carries you through all seasons of life, for it does not depend on circumstance. In this awakening, the search ends, not because you have found something new, but because you have stopped running from what has always been. The presence within you, gentle, infinite, unchanging, is the very essence of life itself, waiting patiently to be recognized, embraced, and lived. When the words "I am" are heard by the awakened heart, they cease to be a phrase of speech and become a living vibration, a direct experience of truth that transcends intellect. It is as though a light long hidden within suddenly reveals itself as the very essence of being. This realization is not the discovery of a new idea, but the unveiling of what has always been present at the core of consciousness. The mind, accustomed to identifying itself with name, form, and history, pauses in awe before a presence that cannot be defined or limited. It is the silent awareness that precedes every thought, the stillness out of which every breath arises. To recognize "I am" is to recognize that this very awareness is not personal but divine, the same life animating all creation. In the moment of realization, the center of identity shifts. No longer do you say, "I am this body" or "I am this story." Instead, you begin to feel that your being extends beyond all boundaries. The I that you once thought yourself to be, a collection of memories, roles, and emotions, dissolves into something vast, luminous, and timeless. It is not that you lose yourself, rather, you awaken to your true self, which has never known limitation. The I am stands before thought, before language, before any concept of self or world. It is the ground of all existence, pure and unconditioned. As this awareness deepens, every fragment of life begins to radiate with sacredness. You look at a flower, a child, a stranger, and sense the same I am shining through them. The separation between observer and observed melts into unity. The world that once seemed divided into countless pieces now reveals itself as one continuous unfolding of divine expression. You realize that what you are perceiving is not outside of you, for the very consciousness through which you see is what you are. Life becomes an endless act of recognition, spirit recognizing itself in form. The declaration, I am, also brings profound simplicity to existence. The mind's endless struggle to define, achieve, and justify begins to fade. You no longer seek validation through possessions, opinions, or accomplishments. You rest in being. From this stillness, creativity, wisdom, and love flow naturally, not as effort, but as expression. You become less concerned with changing life and more attuned to witnessing its divine perfection as it unfolds. The same intelligence that guides the stars guides your steps. The same peace that holds the oceans steady rests within your heart. In this recognition, all fear begins to dissolve. Fear is born of separation, the belief that there is something outside of you that can harm or diminish you. But when you know yourself as the very essence of being, untouched by time or circumstance, fear has no place to stand. You move through the world not as a seeker, but as an instrument of the infinite. Your actions flow from inner harmony rather than from need. You speak less, yet your words carry depth. You act less, yet your actions radiate power, for they are rooted in the awareness that I am is acting through you. Even the sense of personal doership begins to fade. You see that every heartbeat, every thought, every breath is an expression of the same divine energy. The distinction between my will and divine will vanishes, for you recognize they were never two. This realization does not make life passive. On the contrary, it fills it with quiet strength and purpose. You begin to live as a witness, yet deeply engaged, knowing that the one expressing itself through you is infinite, wise, and complete. When the words I am resound within your consciousness, they awaken a remembrance older than time, a knowing that you are not merely alive, you are life itself. Every moment, every experience, every breath becomes a sacred affirmation of that truth. In the silence of awareness, the I Am speaks without words, reminding you that you are, and have always been, the living expression of the infinite. Freedom from fear and striving arises when the soul awakens to the understanding that nothing essential can be added to or taken away from the fullness already present within. For so long, the mind has lived under the illusion that peace and fulfillment are the results of achievement, possession, or approval. It imagines that safety lies in control and happiness in gain. Yet, every attempt to grasp and secure brings a deeper sense of lack, because striving itself is born of the false belief that something is missing. When the awareness of inner wholeness dawns, the feverish need to chase, defend, or compare quietly subsides. You realize that what you have sought in the outer world has always been present as the essence of your own being. This freedom is not indifference, nor is it apathy. It is a deep rest in the certainty of divine completeness. You begin to see that life is not a series of threats or opportunities, but a continuous unfolding of intelligence. The same presence that animates your breath governs the stars and guides the rhythm of creation. When you live in this awareness, you cease trying to make life conform to personal will. You trust its wisdom. You understand that every experience, pleasant or painful, serves to reveal more of the infinite love expressing itself through you. Fear dissolves because you no longer stand apart from the source. You recognize that you are one with it, inseparable and eternal. The mind once believed it had to earn its place in the world, to justify its existence through constant doing. Now it begins to see that being itself is enough. Out of this realization, effort transforms into expression. You act not to achieve, but to allow what is already complete to take form through you. The work you do, the relationships you nurture, the challenges you face, all become avenues for divine creativity. You move through the world lightly, not driven by anxiety but guided by quiet assurance. The results of your actions no longer determine your peace, for peace is your natural state. Fear loses its power when you no longer identify with the passing forms of life. The body, the mind, the circumstances. These are instruments of expression, not the source of identity. You watch them change, and you remain still within, knowing that what you truly are cannot be touched by change. Even in moments of uncertainty, something deep within whispers, "All is well." That whisper is not an optimism of the mind, but a knowing of the spirit. It reminds you that every need is met in its own time, that the universe is self-sustaining, and that you are part of its eternal rhythm. As striving fades, gratitude blossoms. You begin to see abundance everywhere, not as material wealth, but as the constant givingness of life. The sunrise, a friend's smile, the quiet beauty of the evening, all are gifts of the same presence that dwells within. The more you recognize this, the more your heart opens in appreciation. Gratitude replaces fear because you no longer view life as something to win or lose. You begin to live in harmony with the unseen flow that sustains all things. From this place of freedom, love becomes natural and effortless. You are no longer burdened by the need to be loved, for you are aware that love itself is what you are. Compassion flows without effort, generosity arises without calculation, and peace radiates without intent. The soul no longer clings, demands, or resists, it simply allows. In that allowing, you discover that the power sustaining the universe is the same power moving through you. Gentle, unopposed, complete. To live in that awareness is to walk without fear, to act without striving, and to rest in the eternal sufficiency of being. Compassion through oneness is not born of moral effort or emotional sympathy, it is the natural fragrance of awakened awareness. When the heart opens to the realization that the same divine life animates every being, separation begins to dissolve. You no longer look out upon a world of others, for the distinction between self and the rest of creation fades into unity. This recognition does not arise from reasoning or philosophy. It unfolds from direct experience. You feel, in the depths of silence, that there is but one life, one consciousness, one infinite presence expressing itself in countless forms. Each face you see, each voice you hear, becomes a mirror reflecting that same sacred essence. In this awareness, judgment loses its foundation. You no longer need to measure, compare, or condemn, because you recognize that every individual, no matter how lost or broken they appear, is a unique expression of the same divine whole. What once provoked anger or resentment now stirs understanding. You begin to perceive suffering not as evil but as forgetfulness, a temporary blindness to the truth of one's being. And because you have known your own moments of forgetfulness, you meet the pain of others with gentleness rather than blame. Compassion flows effortlessly when you no longer see differences as divisions, but as variations of the same eternal life. To live in oneness is to listen deeply. You become attuned to the silent communication that underlies words and actions. Beyond appearances, you sense the yearning of the soul to return home, to remember its own divinity. Every interaction becomes sacred, every conversation an opportunity for love to recognize itself. You do not seek to fix others or impose understanding. Instead, your mere presence becomes healing. The stillness within you speaks louder than words. People feel at peace not because you give them something, but because through you they glimpse the truth of what they already are. As this awareness matures, the boundaries of love expand beyond the human sphere. You begin to feel kinship with all forms of life, with the trees swaying in the wind, the rivers flowing to the sea, the silent stones resting in the earth. You see that the same life force pulsing in your veins is the rhythm moving through nature. You cannot harm without harming yourself, cannot bless without being blessed. The old sense of domination gives way to stewardship. The impulse to exploit turns into the desire to nurture. In this realization, the world itself becomes your reflection, and care for it becomes as natural as breathing. The practice of compassion is not an action, but a state of being. It is the quiet understanding that love does not need to be earned or deserved. It simply is. You find yourself forgiving without effort, because you see that forgiveness is not the cancellation of wrongdoing, but the recognition that nothing real has been damaged. The divine essence in you cannot be injured, and so it cannot hold grievance. From this inner clarity arises a peace that embraces even those who oppose you. The heart knows that all conflict stems from ignorance of truth, and its response is not resistance but illumination. This compassion transforms relationships. Where once there was expectation, now there is acceptance. Where once there was fear of rejection, now there is freedom to love without demand. You discover that love does not bind, it liberates. It does not cling, it gives. To live in the consciousness of oneness is to live in the pure joy of giving without seeking return, of seeing the divine in all, and of serving not from duty, but from delight. When you walk in the light of oneness, compassion ceases to be something you practice. It becomes who you are. Every breath carries the silent blessing of presence. Every gaze conveys peace. Life becomes an unending act of love, the infinite meeting itself in infinite forms, each moment a holy communion of being. Living by grace, not effort, arises when the soul releases the illusion that life must be controlled, directed, or earned through struggle. In the quiet awakening of awareness, there dawns the recognition that existence unfolds according to a wisdom far beyond personal will. The currents of life are not random, they move in perfect order, carrying every soul toward realization. When you cease to resist that flow, a profound peace descends. You begin to see that grace is not a reward given to the worthy. It is the natural movement of divine life expressing itself through you. Effort belongs to the mind that believes it must create its own destiny. Grace belongs to the heart that knows destiny is already fulfilled in the eternal. The ego measures and strives. It imagines it must earn love, health, success, or spiritual attainment through its own power. Yet all such striving springs from the false premise of separation. When the veil lifts and you glimpse the boundless presence within, the need to strive falls away. You realize that nothing can add to or subtract from what you are in truth. The same intelligence that spins galaxies and opens flowers is working silently in and as you. To live by grace is to trust that this divine rhythm guides every step. Without anxiety or haste, you do not withdraw from action. Rather, action becomes effortless, spontaneous, and infused with peace. You no longer act to get somewhere. You act because the energy of life moves through you, and in its movement, fulfillment is already contained. In this state, success and failure lose their old meanings. You cease measuring life by outcomes, for you know that every circumstance is an expression of perfect unfolding. When events do not align with personal expectation, you rest in faith that the unseen order of grace is at work. Even adversity becomes a teacher, revealing attachments still clung to and fears still believed. The heart grows quiet, the mind grows humble, and life begins to unfold like a river finding its natural course. There is no longer the sense of I must or I should. Instead, there is only I am, and from that being flows the right word, the right gesture, the right deed. Living by grace transforms the quality of your inner life. Worry gives way to trust, tension gives way to stillness, and ambition gives way to gratitude. You no longer feel the weight of self-effort pressing upon your shoulders, for you recognize that you were never the doer. The burden of trying to shape life according to desire dissolves in the awareness that life is shaping itself perfectly. You begin to move with the natural rhythm of things, not ahead of it, not behind it. Each moment carries its own wisdom, and when you are quiet enough to listen, that wisdom becomes clear. To live in grace is to live in continual surrender, not as defeat, but as deep cooperation with the infinite. You let go of insistence and open to allowing. The will of the divine and your own will merge into one current. You begin to feel that everything you once called mine, your body, your mind, your talents, your time, is simply the universe expressing itself through you. From this understanding, gratitude arises without cause. You are grateful not for what you have, but for what you are. An instrument of the infinite, moved by its love, sustained by its peace. The world around. You may continue in its restlessness, but within there is stillness. You walk through life without resistance, knowing that nothing real can be lost and nothing needed will be withheld. Grace carries you where effort could never reach, for grace moves from the eternal, while effort moves from the temporary. The more you trust it, the more it reveals its quiet perfection. In that surrender, you discover the ultimate freedom, to live as life itself, unfolding effortlessly in the light of divine being. And so, when the heart fully awakens to the eternal presence within, the search for meaning ends, not because life loses its mystery, but because the mystery is now lived rather than sought. You no longer move through the world as one apart from it, striving to reach the divine. You live as the divine expressing itself through every thought, breath, and gesture. The light of I Am shines quietly behind all appearances, and in that illumination peace becomes natural, love becomes effortless, and life becomes whole. The world does not change, yet everything is transformed, for you now see with the eyes of the infinite looking upon its own creation. What was once a journey of seeking becomes a revelation of being. In the stillness of awareness, you know, you have never been separate, you have always been home. When the consciousness awakens to the realization of I Am, life ceases to be a series of random experiences and begins to unfold as divine order. The outer world, once seen as a mixture of chance and struggle, becomes transparent, revealing the invisible hand of spirit shaping every moment. The discovery of I Am is not the gaining of power over life, it is the dissolving of the illusion that life ever needed control. It is the quiet recognition that all that you seek already is within the depth of your being. The mind that once ran toward things begins to rest. You no longer strive for peace. You are peace. You no longer search for love. You are love. You no longer demand abundance. You are the very expression of infinite sufficiency. The I Am is the still center of the universe, and as you live from it, all appearances of limitation fade as morning mist before the sun. What changes is not the outer scene, but the awareness through which you behold it. And in that new vision, every form begins to reveal its true substance, God manifesting as life, as harmony, as wholeness. When you say, I am tired, I am poor, I am afraid, you unknowingly claim limitation. But when you rest in the pure I Am without attaching any description, you return to the fountainhead of being where nothing is lacking. In that sacred silence, the false identity dissolves, the self that struggles, competes, and fears, and what remains is the effortless flow of grace. You become a witness to life, not its victim. You find that all things necessary to your fulfillment come gently, without strain, because they were never separate from you. To live from I Am is to live without resistance. It is to walk through the world with open hands and a quiet heart, knowing that the same presence which sustains the stars breathes through you. You begin to see God not as something to reach for, but as the very essence of your own awareness. This realization does not change the world, it changes the One, who sees the world, And through that inner transformation, the outer begins to reflect the peace that was there all along. For when you fully embrace the power of I am, you find that nothing truly needed to change, only your recognition that you already are that which you sought to become. Awakening to divine identity, realizing the truth of I am, awakens you to your divine nature. Life is no longer random or chaotic, but an expression of divine order unfolding through consciousness. Transformation through awareness, not circumstance. True change does not occur in outer conditions, but in inner awareness. Once consciousness shifts, the world mirrors that inner peace and harmony. The end of striving. When you live from the awareness of I am, you stop chasing after peace, love, and abundance, because you are the very source of these qualities. Freedom from limitation, every label attached to I am, such as I am tired or I am afraid, limits the infinite self. Returning to the pure I am dissolves those illusions and reveals the boundless nature of being. Union with the presence. To embrace I am is to recognize God as the essence of your own awareness. You no longer seek the divine outside yourself. You live as the expression of divine life, moving effortlessly in harmony with all creation. Awakening to the realization of I am is the quiet moment when the veil between the visible and invisible world thins, and you begin to sense that life is not happening to you, but through you. It is a turning within, a sacred recognition that your true identity is not the personality, the history, or the name by which the world knows you. Beneath all those passing forms, there is a silent awareness that simply is. That presence, the I am, has never been born, never changed, never suffered, and never died. It is the same life that animates the universe, breathing through you as its perfect expression. When this awareness dawns, a profound peace begins to flow, because you realize that the self you once tried so hard to protect or improve was never the real you. Before this awakening, life appears as a sequence of opposites: gain and loss, joy and sorrow, success and failure. You live reacting to conditions, believing they determine your state of being. But once you touch the truth of I am, the axis shifts. You discover that outer events are mirrors reflecting the inner state of consciousness, not the other way around. The outer cannot define the inner. Only the inner gives meaning to the outer. The people, circumstances, and experiences around you become the language through which divine intelligence speaks to you. Every challenge becomes an invitation to remember who you truly are, to rest again in the awareness that no condition can alter the essence of your being. As you awaken to this realization, the sense of separation begins to fade. You no longer see yourself as one person among many, struggling for survival or recognition. You begin to perceive the unity of all life, the divine thread running through every living form. You sense that the same life that beats in your heart moves the oceans, opens the flowers, and turns the stars in their silent rhythm. This awareness brings with it a compassion that needs no effort, for when you look upon another, you no longer see someone else. You see the one life appearing in a different form. The barriers of judgment, competition, and fear lose their meaning because you know that what you do to another, you do to yourself. Living in this consciousness does not remove you from the world, it transforms how you experience it. The noise and haste of daily living remain, but something within you stands still amid the motion. You begin to meet every moment as it comes, not as an interruption or obstacle, but as an unfolding of divine order. You start to understand that the rhythm of your life is guided by something infinitely wise, something that cannot make mistakes. This realization does not require effort. It comes through surrender. The ego no longer tries to direct life, it yields to the presence that knows the way. In the light of I am, even the idea of personal accomplishment fades. You see that the talents you express, the thoughts that arise, the love you share, are not yours to claim, but gifts of the infinite flowing through you. Gratitude replaces pride, and humility replaces striving. You live with open hands, receiving what each moment brings and releasing it just as freely. There is a deep contentment in knowing that you are not the doer, but the instrument through which divine life sings its melody. This awakening is not achieved through study or discipline alone. It happens in stillness, when you stop searching for something outside yourself and turn inward to the quiet awareness that has been present all along. In that stillness, you hear the whisper of the eternal saying, "Be still and know that I am." And in that knowing, all fear dissolves, for you realize that you have never been apart from the source. You are that which is, and always has been, pure, unchanging, and whole. True transformation does not occur in the shifting scenes of the outer world, but in the awakening of inner awareness. The mind is accustomed to believing that change must be achieved through effort, by altering circumstances, people, or conditions, but this belief is born from forgetfulness of one's divine center. When consciousness is rooted in the awareness of I am, life begins to unfold differently. Outer experiences may still appear to rise and fall, yet they no longer define you. What once brought anxiety or joy becomes merely an image passing before the stillness of your being. You begin to see that the real revolution is not of events, but of perception. When awareness deepens, the same world is seen through new eyes. The problems that once demanded correction lose their urgency because they no longer hold power over you. They are seen for what they truly are, temporary projections of thought without substance apart from your attention. In that quiet recognition, a great peace arises. You no longer rush to fix appearances, for you know that every form, pleasant or painful, is a shadow of consciousness itself. As the light within grows brighter, the shadows rearrange themselves without effort. This is the mystery of spiritual transformation. The outer follows the inner as naturally as a reflection follows the movement of light. The ego lives in the realm of opposites. It measures progress by visible results, clings to control, and fears uncertainty. But once you begin to live from the awareness of I am, a higher rhythm takes over. You are no longer bound by reaction, you become a witness. You realize that every event carries a hidden blessing, a message from the divine intelligence that governs all things. What you once called failure becomes a doorway to humility and trust. What you once called delay becomes preparation. What you once called loss reveals itself as liberation. The outer experience remains, but your inner vision transforms it into revelation. This shift in consciousness changes the way you move through life. Instead of struggling to mold reality, you allow it to unfold according to divine law. You act when inspired, but your actions no longer arise from fear or ambition. They flow from a sense of quiet knowing. The more you trust this unseen order, the more harmony reveals itself in visible form. Relationships become gentler. Work becomes an expression of service rather than striving, and even challenges become part of a sacred dance designed to awaken you further. You discover that life has never been against you. It has always been guiding you toward awareness of your own divine nature. To live from this realization is to become transparent to spirit. The inner light no longer flickers with emotion or doubt, but shines steadily, illuminating every aspect of experience. When conflict appears, you no longer meet it with resistance, but with understanding. When sorrow visits, you do not deny it, but allow it to pass through the heart, knowing that the presence behind it remains untouched. Transformation, then, is not an event that happens once, but a continuous unfolding, a deepening recognition that all appearances come and go, while the awareness of I am abides unchanged. This is why true change cannot be forced. It blossoms naturally as you rest in the stillness of being. The outer world reorganizes itself in harmony with your inner peace. You do not make it happen. You allow it to happen. Every moment of acceptance, every pause in judgment, every act of surrender opens the door wider for grace to enter. Slowly, gently, you realize that the power you sought to control the world was never needed. The world was always the mirror of your consciousness. When the mirror reflects love, understanding, and peace, the images it shows you are transformed. And thus, without effort, without struggle, life itself becomes the visible expression of the invisible truth you have found within. When you awaken to the awareness of I am, the endless striving that has filled your days begins to dissolve. The human mind has been conditioned to believe that peace, love, and fulfillment are rewards that must be earned through effort, struggle, and pursuit. You have been taught to search for meaning outside yourself, to seek approval, possessions, or achievements as proof of your worth. Yet all striving carries within it the unspoken belief that something is missing, that you are not already complete. When the realization of I am dawns, that belief falls away like a shadow exposed to the sun. You recognize that what you have been seeking was never apart from you. The very peace you chased was the essence of your own being. The love you longed for was the fragrance of your own heart. The abundance you worked for was the natural radiance of the infinite expressing through you. In that sacred awareness, a profound restfulness fills the soul. The compulsion to prove, to attain, or to become gives way to a deep contentment with being. You understand that life is not a race toward perfection, but a revelation of the perfection that already is. Every moment becomes whole in itself, needing nothing added or taken away. The energy once spent in struggle is transformed into stillness, and from that stillness, inspiration flows without strain. Actions continue, but they arise not from desire or fear. They unfold from the quiet knowing of divine rhythm. You no longer live as the doer, you live as the expression of the doing. This cessation of striving does not lead to passivity, rather it opens the way for effortless action. The body may move, words may be spoken, creations may emerge, but they come through you, not from you. You begin to experience what it means to be a channel of divine purpose rather than its originator. The mind that once demanded results now yields to the rhythm of the infinite. Success and failure lose their emotional grip because both are seen as passing waves upon the same ocean of consciousness. You no longer ask, "Will this bring me happiness?" For you have discovered that happiness is not a destination but your natural state when the seeking ends. As the awareness of I am deepens, even the smallest moments take on new meaning. Washing a dish, walking down a street, or listening to another becomes an act of presence. The sacred is no longer confined to temples or prayer, it lives in every breath. There is a lightness in the way you move through life because you are no longer carrying the burden of becoming. The need to fix, to plan, to control fades, replaced by a trust in the wisdom of life itself. Everything you once tried to achieve through willpower begins to unfold naturally when you no longer stand in the way. The universe responds not to your striving, but to your stillness, when the heart releases its grasp on outcomes. A higher order of abundance appears. You find that what is truly yours cannot be missed, and what leaves was never meant to stay. You cease chasing love because you recognize that love is not something you receive, but something you are. You cease seeking validation because the eternal I am within you needs none. You cease fearing lack because the source of all supply is inseparable from your being. In this state, gratitude flows effortlessly, not as a practice, but as a constant awareness of grace. To live without striving is to live in the rhythm of spirit. You rise each day not to conquer life, but to let it unfold through you. What once felt like effort now feels like expression. You begin to understand that fulfillment is not found in attaining what you desire, but in awakening to what you already are. And in that awakening, the restless motion of desire comes to rest in the peace of presence. The circle of seeking closes, and you stand at its still center, knowing that nothing was ever missing and nothing needs to be attained, for the fullness of life has always been contained in the simple truth: I am. Every thought you attach to the sacred I am becomes a seed that shapes your experience. When you say, I am tired, I am unworthy, I am afraid, you unknowingly claim those states as your own. You breathe life into limitation through the creative power of divine identity. The words may seem harmless, but consciousness takes them as truth, and the world reflects them back. Yet when you strip away every label, every description, and rest in the pure, unqualified I am, you return to the fountainhead of being. In that stillness, there is no weakness, no fear, no lack, only the boundless presence that is the essence of all life. You discover that you were never the limited self struggling to overcome the world. You were always the light through which the world is seen. To live in the awareness of the unconditioned I am is to free yourself from the tyranny of false identification. The mind has been trained to define itself by experiences, rich or poor, strong or weak, loved or unloved. But these are passing masks worn by the eternal self. When you cease to identify with them, you begin to witness life rather than react to it. This shift is subtle yet profound. It is like awakening from a dream in which you mistook the characters for yourself. You realize that the one who was struggling to become something better was never real. It was only the reflection of belief. The moment you drop those beliefs, the weight of struggle dissolves, and what remains is effortless being. This freedom is not gained through denial of experience, but through recognition of truth. When you say simply, I am, without adding anything, you stand in the power of the infinite. You do not need to affirm health, wealth, or joy, for those are natural expressions of the divine presence that I am. The moment you rest in that awareness, everything unlike it begins to fade. Fear dissolves, not because you conquered it, but because the light of truth leaves no room for shadow. Lack disappears, not because you accumulated more, but because you awaken to the realization that the source of all already flows through you as your very life. In this state, language itself becomes sacred. You speak less, but each word carries weight, born from the silence of understanding. When you say, I am peace, it is not an affirmation of something to be achieved, but an acknowledgement of what already is. When you say, I am love, it is not a hope or desire, it is the truth of your being revealed. The words become instruments of creation, shaping reality through the vibration of awareness rather than effort. This is why the masters taught that the misuse of I am is the root of suffering. To attach falsehood to it is to build illusions. To let it stand pure is to dwell in the kingdom of spirit. As this realization deepens, your relationship with the world changes completely. You no longer try to fix appearances because you know they are merely reflections of thought. Instead, you tend to the inner garden of awareness. Every time you remember I am, you water the seed of truth, and it bears fruit in perfect order. Health blooms where there was discord, peace arises where there was confusion, abundance flows where there was fear of lack. Yet these changes come not as miracles imposed from above, but as natural consequences of alignment with reality. To live from the pure I am is to live beyond duality. You cease to be a seeker, for you have found the source. You cease to be afraid, for there is no second power to threaten you. You cease to strive for love, for you recognize yourself as its living expression. In this awareness, the self-made walls of limitation fall away and you stand free, not because you became more, but because you remembered what you have always been. To embrace I am is to awaken to the truth that the presence you have been seeking outside yourself has been within you all along. For lifetimes, humanity has searched for God in temples, books, and distant heavens, yet all the while the silent voice within has whispered, "Be still and know that I am." This realization does not come with thunder or revelation, but through a deep stillness that dissolves the illusion of separation. When the awareness of I am dawns, the idea of a God apart from you fades. You no longer speak to the divine as a beggar asking for gifts, but as a child awakening in its parent's embrace. You recognize that you and the presence are not two. You are the expression of the same infinite life that forms the stars, the oceans, and the breath moving gently through your chest. In this state of realization, prayer transforms. It ceases to be petition and becomes communion. You do not pray for things. You rest in the awareness that all things are already fulfilled in the infinite mind that is your own. The longing that once reached outward now turns inward and finds rest in the quiet joy of unity. The sense of absence dissolves, for how can that which is omnipresent be missing? You begin to live from the understanding that every act, every breath, every movement is the divine revealing itself as you. The boundaries between the sacred and the ordinary vanish. Washing the dishes becomes as holy as prayer. Walking down a street becomes a journey through the temple of life itself. When you live from this union, fear loses its foundation. The mind no longer trembles before uncertainty because it knows there is only one power, one presence, one life. You see that what you once called good or evil, joy or sorrow, were only different shades of the same eternal light. The belief in opposites dissolves, leaving only harmony. This is not denial of the world's appearances, but a recognition of their source. You begin to perceive through the eyes of spirit, seeing perfection where the senses see chaos, wholeness where the world sees lack. In that vision, forgiveness becomes natural because there is no longer an other to forgive, only the one presence expressing itself in countless forms. This awareness brings about a profound humility. You realize that you are not the author of your life, but the instrument through which the infinite plays its melody. Every gift, every word, every act of kindness flows not from personal will, but from the silent abundance of spirit moving through you. The ego, which once claimed ownership of good and blamed others for evil, yields to the quiet realization that all is God in expression. There is no pride in achievement, no guilt in failure, for the doer has disappeared. What remains is surrender, not as resignation, but as joyous participation in the unfolding of divine order. As you live in this state of oneness, even time begins to lose its grip. The past no longer binds, and the future no longer threatens, because the eternal now becomes your home. You rest in the realization that life is not a journey toward God, but the eternal unfolding of God as life itself. Every heartbeat, every sunrise, every breath becomes a reminder that the presence you call divine is not something to be attained, it is the essence of your being. When the awareness of I am is fully embraced, the world no longer appears as something to conquer or escape, but as something to behold. You walk through it gently with eyes open and heart still, knowing that everywhere you look, you see only one life, one infinite, boundless, loving presence expressing itself through all things. You live not as a seeker, but as the seen, not as the worshipper, but as the revelation itself. And so, when you come to the full realization of I am, life no longer feels like a path to be conquered, but a presence to be lived. You cease reaching outward for signs of completion, for within you rests the wholeness that no circumstance can grant or take away. The battles of the mind fall silent, and what remains is the gentle rhythm of spirit breathing itself as you. Every moment becomes sacred, not because of what it brings, but because of the awareness through which it is seen. You begin to walk through the world not as one seeking truth, but as truth revealed, not as one demanding light, but as the very light that illumines all things. In that quiet knowing, you discover that nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be removed. The outer world reflects your inner peace, and life itself becomes the living testimony of divine order. The power of I am is not something to attain, it is the eternal song already singing within the soul, waiting only to be heard. When at last you listen, the search ends, and you rest in the timeless grace of being, where all is one, all is whole, and all is forever held in the silent beauty of I am.
You've been taught that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth means justice through revenge. Churches have preached it as divine law for centuries. Society built entire legal systems on this interpretation. Governments justified wars with this principle. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something that will shatter everything you believed about this ancient teaching, and what he found changes not just biblical understanding, but your power to live free from attack. What if I told you this phrase was never about punishment at all? What if it was actually a mystical instruction for spiritual protection that organized religion deliberately misunderstood for 2,000 years? The truth has been hidden in plain sight, encoded in Scripture, waiting for consciousness advanced enough to recognize it. Today you're about to discover what it really means and how it can transform every conflict in your life. This isn't just biblical interpretation or theological debate. This is a consciousness technique that can transform how you respond to every attack, insult, betrayal, or injustice in your life. Joel Goldsmith called it the principle of impersonalization, and it's one of the most powerful spiritual secrets ever taught. Masters have used this for centuries to remain untouchable by human malice while living in the midst of conflict and chaos. When you understand what eye for an eye truly means, you gain access to a level of spiritual immunity that nothing external can penetrate. You stop being a victim of other people's consciousness and become a master of your own experience. You discover that the ancient teaching wasn't about what others do to you, but about what consciousness you hold within yourself. Let me take you back to the moment when Joel Goldsmith first penetrated this mystery. He was deep in meditation, studying ancient Hebrew texts, when he realized something that made him sit up in shock. The original context of eye for an eye wasn't about literal retaliation at all. It was about spiritual equivalent and the immutable law of consciousness that governs all human experience. In mystical Hebrew tradition, which the rabbis understood but rarely taught publicly, the eye represents spiritual perception and consciousness. The tooth represents the power to consume, to take in, to make something part of your experience. So eye for an eye really means perception for perception, consciousness for consciousness returning to itself. It's describing how reality operates as a perfect mirror, reflecting back exactly what we project from the depths of our consciousness. When someone attacks you, criticizes you, betrays you, or seeks to harm you, they're actually revealing their own consciousness level to you. They're showing you their inner world, their spiritual state, their level of understanding. Joel taught that grasping this single truth changes everything because you immediately stop taking attacks personally and start seeing them as impersonal manifestations of human consciousness operating at whatever level that person has attained. This shift from personal to impersonal is the key that unlocks spiritual immunity. When you see an attack as personal, aimed specifically at you because of who you are, you absorb the poison. You carry the wound. You react from pain and create more conflict. But when you see the attack as impersonal consciousness expressing itself through that particular person, something miraculous happens that Joel proved thousands of times in his healing practice. Here's where the teaching becomes revolutionary and practical. Joel Goldsmith taught that when you truly understand eye for an eye as a consciousness principle rather than a revenge doctrine, you gain immunity to harm. Not physical immunity necessarily, though that sometimes occurs, but spiritual immunity that completely changes your entire experience of conflict, attack, and human malice in ways that seem impossible until you experience it yourself. Think carefully about the last time someone criticized you harshly, betrayed your trust, spread lies about you, or treated you with deliberate cruelty. Your natural human response was probably hurt that cut deep, anger that consumed your peace, or the burning desire to retaliate and make them feel what you felt. That's because you personalized the attack completely. You made it about you, about your worth, about whether you deserved such treatment. But Joel discovered through years of spiritual practice and mystical insight that attacks aren't personal at all, even when they appear personal. They're impersonal operations of human consciousness, expressing itself at whatever level of spiritual understanding that consciousness has reached. The person attacking you could have attacked anyone. The attack comes from their consciousness state, not from truth about you. When you genuinely see an attack as impersonal consciousness expressing itself, something miraculous occurs that changes your entire experience. The attack loses its power over you instantly. You don't absorb the poison into your being. You don't carry the wound forward into your future. You recognize it as human belief operating through that person, appearing as attack, but having no basis in spiritual reality or truth about your divine identity. This is the secret that literally changes everything about how you experience life. Eye for an eye means you receive back the exact consciousness you hold and entertain. If you hold consciousness of being attacked, vulnerable, and victimized, you will experience attack, vulnerability, and victimization. If you hold consciousness of divine immunity, spiritual protection, and untouchable identity, you will experience protection regardless of what appears to happen in the external world of human drama. Joel Goldsmith didn't just teach this as theory or spiritual philosophy. He proved this principle worked in his own life repeatedly, consistently, demonstrably. When faced with vicious criticism from religious authorities, with competition from jealous practitioners, with actual malice from people who wanted to destroy his work, he would immediately shift into spiritual consciousness and recognize the attack as impersonal human belief operating at that level with absolutely no power in divine reality. The situations would dissolve without him fighting back. The attacks would lose their momentum. The attackers would often apologize later or simply disappear from his experience, not through his human effort or defensive action, but through the operation of spiritual law responding to his consciousness. This is what eye for an eye really describes, the law of consciousness creating equivalent experience. The reason this profound teaching was misunderstood for millennia is embarrassingly simple. The human mind wants revenge desperately. It wants justice through punishment. It wants to see attackers suffer. But spiritual law operates on a completely different principle. It operates through consciousness level, not through human action or reaction. When you change your consciousness, you automatically and inevitably change your experience without doing anything in the external world. Let me share a transformation story that demonstrates this principle with such clarity that you'll never doubt its power again. Sarah was going through the most brutal divorce imaginable. Her ex-husband, consumed by rage and vindictiveness, was lying systematically in court proceedings, turning their children against her with calculated manipulation, spreading vicious rumors throughout their community, and using his greater financial resources to destroy her. She was consumed with rage that burned through her day and night. The desire for revenge obsessed her thoughts. She fantasized about exposing his lies, destroying his reputation, making him pay for every moment of suffering he caused. She could barely eat or sleep. Her health was deteriorating. Her remaining relationships were suffering because she could talk about nothing but his attacks. When Sarah discovered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on impersonalization through a friend's recommendation, she was deeply skeptical. How could seeing attacks as impersonal possibly help when someone was actively, deliberately, personally destroying your life? It seemed like spiritual bypass, like denial of reality, like foolish passivity in the face of real evil. But she was desperate enough to try the practice Joel recommended. Every single time she felt attacked, which was dozens of times daily, she would pause whatever she was doing and say internally with as much conviction as she could muster, "This is not personal. This is human consciousness operating at this level of fear and pain. This has no power in divine reality. I refuse to accept this into my consciousness." For 3 weeks of faithful practice, nothing seemed to change in the external situation. The attacks continued relentlessly. The legal battles intensified. But something profound was shifting inside her consciousness. By week 4, Sarah noticed something remarkable. She wasn't carrying the emotional poison anymore. She could think about her ex-husband's actions without rage instantly consuming her peace. She could hear about new attacks without her body flooding with stress hormones. She was observing the drama rather than being destroyed by it. Her sleep improved. Her appetite returned. Friends commented that she seemed different, lighter, more herself. Then something completely unexpected happened in the external situation. Her ex-husband's lawyer called her lawyer, requesting mediation rather than continued litigation. In the mediation session, her ex-husband seemed different, less aggressive, almost confused about his own behavior. Within 2 months, they reached a settlement that was remarkably fair, given how the case had been proceeding. Sarah later learned from mutual friends that her ex-husband had told people he didn't know why he'd been so vicious. He said something had shifted and he couldn't maintain the rage anymore. Sarah understood what Joel taught. Her consciousness shift had changed the entire energy field of the situation. When she stopped empowering the attack by fighting it from wounded consciousness, divine law could operate and resolve what human effort could never fix. This wasn't coincidence or lucky timing. This was consciousness law operating as reliably as gravity. Eye for an eye had played out perfectly. Sarah's consciousness of being attacked had created experience of attack. When she shifted to consciousness of spiritual immunity, the attack lost its power and the situation transformed. Joel had proven this pattern thousands of times in 40 years of teaching and healing work. Another profoundly powerful example comes from Marcus, a successful business owner whose trusted partner of 15 years embezzled over $200,000 and disappeared completely, leaving the business on the verge of bankruptcy. Marcus was financially devastated, legally advised that recovery was unlikely, and emotionally destroyed by the betrayal from someone he'd considered family. His anger was literally eating him alive. He couldn't focus on saving his business because rage consumed his thoughts day and night. His blood pressure skyrocketed. He developed stress-related health problems. His remaining employees were worried about him. His family didn't know how to help. He was trapped in consciousness of betrayal, victimization, and righteous fury that felt completely justified, but was destroying him faster than the financial loss. Marcus began practicing Joel's principle of impersonalization with the intensity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Every morning before even getting out of bed, he would spend 30 minutes in meditation recognizing the impersonal nature of greed, dishonesty, and betrayal. He worked to see his former partner not as personally against him, but as operating from a consciousness of lack and fear so powerful that theft seemed necessary for survival. This practice didn't excuse the crime legally or morally. Marcus still pursued every legal avenue available, but it freed him completely from the spiritual poison of hatred that was killing him. Within 6 weeks of daily practice, Marcus reported feeling genuine peace for the first time since the betrayal. His blood pressure normalized. His focus returned. His business began recovering because he could think clearly again. His creativity came back. Then, 8 months after beginning the impersonalization practice, something extraordinary occurred. Authorities in another state contacted Marcus. His former partner had been located through an unrelated investigation and significant assets were being recovered. The legal process would take time, but Marcus would recover most of his losses. But here's what Marcus told Joel directly. He didn't even care that much about the money by that point. The real recovery had already happened in his consciousness. He'd been freed from the prison of hatred and victimization. He'd discovered that his peace didn't depend on external justice. He'd learned that consciousness is the only thing that truly matters, because consciousness creates experience. Joel would say this wasn't magic or mysticism in the sense of supernatural intervention. This was consciousness law operating as precisely and reliably as any physical law. When you stop empowering human evil by fighting it from the level of human consciousness, divine law has space to operate. When you impersonalize, you remove yourself from the battlefield of human conflict and let spiritual principle handle what human effort cannot resolve. Marcus's experience demonstrates what eye for an eye really means in practical application. His consciousness of being betrayed created the experience of betrayal consuming his life. When he shifted to consciousness of spiritual immunity and impersonal recognition, his experience transformed even before the external situation resolved. The consciousness shift was the real healing. The money recovery was just confirmation that spiritual law operates in practical affairs. If these real transformation stories inspire you to discover more of Joel Goldsmith's hidden teachings that actually work in daily life, like this video to help others find this wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness principles with practical applications, and comment which story resonated most powerfully with your current situation or challenges. Jennifer's story reveals how this principle works with ongoing daily attacks that seem endless. She worked in a toxic corporate environment with a supervisor who seemed personally determined to destroy her career through systematic harassment. Constant public criticism in meetings, deliberate humiliation in front of clients, blocked promotions despite excellent performance, and carefully documented false accusations designed to build a termination case. Human Resources was completely unhelpful, essentially telling Jennifer to deal with it or leave. The job market made leaving difficult. Jennifer felt trapped in a nightmare of daily attacks that were grinding down her spirit, her confidence, and her mental health. She would drive to work with her stomach in knots, spend the entire day in fight-or-flight mode, and come home emotionally exhausted. Joel Goldsmith's teaching on impersonalization gave Jennifer a completely different approach to her situation. Instead of continuing to defend herself legally, plot revenge fantasies, or sink into victimhood and depression, she began to practice seeing her supervisor as a soul struggling with deep insecurity and fear, rather than as a personal enemy determined to destroy her specifically. She practiced recognizing that the attacks were not about Jennifer's worth, competence, or value as a human being. They were about her supervisor's consciousness state, probably driven by feeling threatened by Jennifer's competence, struggling with personal problems Jennifer knew nothing about, and operating from a level of consciousness that produces attacking behavior. The attacks were impersonal consciousness expressing itself, not truth about Jennifer. Jennifer committed to spending 10 minutes every single morning before work, establishing her consciousness firmly in spiritual truth. She would sit in her car in the parking lot and practice recognizing that she was divinely protected, that human malice had no power in spiritual reality, that her true identity was untouchable by human belief or behavior, and that this situation was an opportunity to prove consciousness principle rather than a victimization. She stopped reacting emotionally to attacks, which initially confused her supervisor and eventually began to defuse the dynamic. When criticized in meetings, Jennifer would pause internally, recognize it as impersonal consciousness, refuse to absorb the poison, and respond calmly from facts rather than defensiveness. Her supervisor seemed confused that the attacks weren't landing as before. Within 3 months of consistent practice, something shifted dramatically. Her supervisor was abruptly transferred to another department as part of a reorganization. Jennifer was promoted to a position she'd been denied repeatedly. The new supervisor was collaborative and supportive. Jennifer later learned through office gossip that her former supervisor was dealing with severe personal issues, including divorce and financial problems that had nothing to do with Jennifer. The attacks had always been impersonal projections of pain and fear, exactly as Joel taught. Jennifer's supervisor had been attacking life itself through attacking Jennifer. When Jennifer stopped accepting the attacks into her consciousness, stopped empowering them with her emotional reaction, the entire dynamic collapsed because it takes 2 consciousnesses to maintain a conflict. When one consciousness shifts to impersonalization, conflict cannot continue. These 3 detailed stories reveal something profound that you need to grasp completely. When you understand eye for an eye as consciousness principle rather than revenge instruction, you gain access to a level of spiritual protection and immunity that human effort cannot provide through any amount of self-defense, legal action, or counterattack. You stop being a victim of circumstances and become a conscious participant in spiritual law. Joel Goldsmith spent 4 decades proving this principle worked consistently across thousands of cases. Not sometimes randomly, not occasionally when conditions were right, but as reliable spiritual law that operates as precisely as mathematical principle. The key is understanding with your entire being that attacks are always impersonal operations of human consciousness at whatever level, and your only real work is maintaining your own consciousness at the level of spiritual truth. This doesn't mean you don't take practical action when needed and appropriate. You absolutely still use legal systems when crimes occur. You set firm boundaries with toxic people. You protect yourself physically when threatened. But you take these practical actions from a consciousness of spiritual immunity rather than from fear, hatred, or victimization. That internal shift changes everything about the effectiveness of your actions. When you act from wounded consciousness, your actions are contaminated by the poison you've absorbed. They're driven by reaction rather than wisdom. They often escalate conflict or create new problems. But when you act from clear consciousness that has impersonalized the attack, your actions are guided by divine wisdom. They're effective because they're not distorted by emotional poison. You respond rather than react, and that difference is everything. Now let me teach you the specific technique Joel Goldsmith used for impersonalization in exact detail. This isn't vague theory or general spiritual philosophy. This is the actual practice that protected him and thousands of his students from psychological harm, emotional devastation, and spiritual poison. The technique has 3 essential steps that must be practiced exactly as Joel taught them for maximum effectiveness. Step 1 is immediate recognition, the instant you become aware of feeling attacked. The very moment you feel attacked, criticized, betrayed, insulted, or harmed in any way, you pause whatever you're doing and say internally with full attention, "This is not personal to me. This is impersonal human consciousness expressing itself at this level." You're not denying the attack happened in the human scene. You're correctly identifying its true nature and source. Step 2 is conscious refusal to absorb the poison being offered. You deliberately and consciously refuse to take the attack into your consciousness as truth about yourself. You recognize that the other person is essentially offering you their consciousness state, their pain, their fear, their limited perception, and you have the spiritual power to decline the offer completely. Joel would say firmly, "I will not accept this into my consciousness. It has no power in spiritual reality." Step 3 is establishing divine truth about your identity and experience. You consciously affirm your true identity as spiritual consciousness, eternally untouchable by human belief, opinion, or malice. You rest in the awareness that nothing external has power to harm your true being or determine your experience. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation trying to change reality. This is recognition of spiritual fact that's always true regardless of appearances. Joel taught a complementary practice he called the principle of one power that enhances impersonalization by addressing the fundamental root of why attacks seem powerful in the first place. We've been conditioned to believe in 2 powers operating in the universe: good and evil, God and devil, forces attacking us and forces defending us. But spiritual reality knows only one power, and grasping this transforms everything. When you encounter any attack of any kind, immediately recognize with your full understanding that evil has no actual power because only one power exists in reality. The appearance of attack is human consciousness misperceiving reality, exactly like mistaking a rope for a snake in dim light. The snake never existed as a real threat. Only the misperception had power to create fear, but the fear was based on illusion, not reality. Practice establishing one power consciousness daily, not just during attacks. Every single morning as part of your spiritual practice, establish firmly in consciousness that only divine power operates in your experience. Human malice, disease, lack, limitation, and fear are not secondary powers fighting against good. They're illusions, misperceptions, beliefs that dissolve completely when consciousness recognizes that only one power exists. Joel proved this principle of one power repeatedly in his healing work with so-called incurable diseases. Medical conditions that seemed overwhelmingly powerful, diseases that appeared unstoppable and terminal, would dissolve when consciousness firmly established the truth of one power operating. The same exact principle applies to human attacks. They're not real power opposing you. They're misperception appearing as power but having no substance in reality. Another crucial technique Joel taught is what he called witness consciousness. This practice trains you to observe human drama without becoming entangled in it, without identifying with the character being attacked. When attacks happen, you consciously step back mentally and watch the entire situation from a higher perspective, like watching a movie rather than being the actor on screen getting attacked. From witness consciousness, you see the complete picture with clarity. You see the attacker's pain and fear driving their behavior. You see your own habitual reactions and patterns. You see the impersonal nature of human consciousness playing out its dramas according to the level of understanding present. This perspective naturally creates immunity because you're no longer identified with the small self that can be attacked. Practice this witness consciousness throughout your day with small irritations first to build the capacity. When someone cuts you off in traffic, witness the irritation arising in your consciousness without becoming the irritation, without identifying with it. When someone speaks rudely in a store, witness the reaction without being consumed by it. Build this witness capacity gradually with minor situations. When major attacks come, you'll have developed the spiritual muscle to immediately shift into witness consciousness automatically. The attack still happens in the human scene where bodies and personalities interact, but you're observing from spiritual consciousness, from your true identity that cannot be touched. From that elevated space, divine wisdom can guide your response rather than human reaction controlling you. Joel's final complementary technique is blessing the attacker, which sounds completely impossible when you're hurt, but is scientifically powerful for shifting your own consciousness instantly. You're not blessing the attack itself or condoning the behavior. You're blessing the person's true spiritual identity that exists beyond their current limited consciousness level and the actions it produces. The practice is simple in form, but profound in effect. When someone attacks you, after you've impersonalized and established one power and shifted to witness consciousness, you then silently bless them with genuine intention. You say internally, "Father, bless this person's true spiritual nature. Reveal to them their divine identity. Free them from the consciousness of fear and pain that drives this attacking behavior." This practice isn't primarily for their benefit, though it may help them eventually. It's for your consciousness immediately. The moment you genuinely bless an attacker from your heart, you cannot simultaneously hate them or hold poison toward them. You cannot maintain cursing consciousness while blessing. Your consciousness automatically shifts to a higher level where the attack cannot touch you because blessing and being wounded cannot coexist. Joel taught clearly that blessing doesn't mean allowing abuse to continue or being passive toward injustice. You still set necessary boundaries firmly. You take legal action if warranted. You remove yourself from toxic situations. But you do all these practical things from a blessed consciousness rather than a cursed consciousness. That internal difference changes your entire experience and very often transforms outcomes in ways human effort alone cannot achieve. Now let's address honestly the real challenges you'll face when practicing this principle in your actual life. The biggest obstacle by far is the human mind's absolute conviction, supported by a lifetime of conditioning, that attacks are personal. Your ego will insist ferociously that this attack is about you specifically, aimed at you deliberately, designed to hurt you personally because of who you are or what you've done. That belief that attacks are personal is actually the poison itself, not the attack. The attack is just words, actions, or circumstances in the external world. The poison is your consciousness personalizing it, taking it in, making it truth about yourself, carrying it forward into your future. When you first try to impersonalize an attack, your mind will rebel with tremendous force. Your mind will produce 1,000 apparently logical reasons why this situation is different from all others, why this attack really is personal unlike other attacks, why the technique won't work here even if it worked elsewhere. Joel warned his students explicitly about this resistance. He called it the human mind's fierce resistance to spiritual law, because the ego survives through personalizing everything. The practice requires patient repetition and commitment. The first 20 or 30 times you attempt to impersonalize attacks, it will probably feel fake, mechanical, ineffective. Your emotions will still be triggered instantly. You'll still feel hurt or angry or afraid. This is completely normal and expected. You're retraining consciousness that's been conditioned for decades, possibly lifetimes, to personalize absolutely everything that happens. Joel strongly advised his students to practice impersonalization on small irritations first rather than waiting for major betrayals. Don't make your first attempt at this technique the moment you discover your spouse's affair or your business partner's embezzlement. Practice on daily annoyances, minor criticisms, small slights, traffic incidents, rude store clerks. Build the consciousness muscle gradually so it's genuinely strong when serious attacks come. Another major challenge people face is the fear that impersonalization means becoming passive, becoming a doormat, allowing abuse to continue without response. People worry that if they stop taking attacks personally, they'll become weak and ineffective. This completely misunderstands the principle and what Joel actually taught. Impersonalization actually empowers you to respond far more effectively than personalization does. When you personalize attacks, you react from wounded ego consciousness. Your responses are driven by hurt, anger, fear, shame, or the desperate need to defend yourself and prove your worth. These emotional reactions are rarely wise or effective. They often escalate conflict dramatically or create entirely new problems. You're fighting from a consciousness of being attacked, which means you've already lost. When you impersonalize completely, you respond from spiritual wisdom rather than human reaction. You see the situation with clarity undistorted by emotional poison. You can take strong action if needed. You can set firm boundaries. You can use legal systems. You can walk away entirely. But you do everything from power and clarity rather than from woundedness. Your actions are effective because they're not contaminated by absorbed poison. The challenge of ongoing, persistent attacks requires special attention and advanced practice. What do you do when impersonalization seems to work momentarily, but attacks continue relentlessly? When a toxic family member, co-worker, neighbor, or situation persists despite your faithful consciousness work? Joel had very specific guidance for this scenario that many students face. First, recognize clearly that your work isn't to change the attacker or stop the attacks through your consciousness. Your work is solely to maintain your own consciousness at the level of spiritual truth, regardless of what's happening externally. The attacks might continue in the external human scene while your internal experience transforms completely. That's still absolute success in spiritual terms. Second, understand that persistence of attacks often means you're being called to deeper, more committed practice. You might be impersonalizing intellectually, saying the right words, but still carrying emotional charge underneath. Joel would say, go deeper into the practice. Practice longer periods. Be more vigilant about the consciousness you're entertaining during the day when not in formal practice. Third, honestly, examine if you need to take practical action you've been avoiding. Impersonalization isn't a substitute for setting necessary boundaries, leaving genuinely toxic situations, or using legal protection when warranted. Spiritual principle and practical action work together harmoniously. Sometimes the divine guidance that comes through clear consciousness is to physically remove yourself from the situation entirely. Let me share the breakthrough moment that usually comes after several weeks of faithful daily practice. You'll notice quite suddenly that attacks don't trigger the same emotional devastation they once did automatically. Someone can say the same hurtful thing that would have destroyed your peace for days before, and you feel surprisingly untouched, almost surprised at your own lack of reaction. This shift isn't numbness or emotional suppression or denial. You still recognize clearly that the attack happened in the human scene. You might still choose to take appropriate action, but the poison doesn't enter your consciousness. The wound doesn't form in your psyche. You observe human consciousness operating at that level without making it your reality or truth about yourself. Joel called this breakthrough moment achieving spiritual immunity, and it's one of the most liberating experiences possible in human life. The breakthrough often comes suddenly after gradual internal work you couldn't see happening. Students report a moment when they realized they'd been attacked significantly but completely forgot to be hurt. They impersonalized automatically without conscious effort. That's when you know the principle has moved from intellectual understanding to actual consciousness demonstration. If these advanced techniques for overcoming spiritual obstacles and achieving immunity speak directly to your heart and need, like this video to support Joel Goldsmith's teachings reaching people who desperately need them. Subscribe for more advanced consciousness practices with detailed instructions, and comment which specific challenge you're personally committed to transforming through impersonalization starting today. Now let's explore advanced application in the most difficult scenarios possible. What about attacks from people you deeply love? Family members who criticize you constantly and cruelly, romantic partners who betray your trust completely, adult children who reject you despite everything you've given them. Joel taught that these are actually the most important situations to practice impersonalization, not the least. When someone you love attacks you, the personalization goes infinitely deeper because you're emotionally attached to their opinion and their love. You desperately want them to see you truly, love you rightly, treat you well. When they don't, when they attack instead, the wound cuts to your very core identity. Joel understood this pain intimately from his own life experience. The practice remains exactly the same, but requires absolutely fierce commitment and repeated application. This person I love is operating from a consciousness level that produces this attacking behavior. It's not about my worth or value. It's not personal truth about me. It's their consciousness state expressing itself according to spiritual law. I refuse to let their consciousness level become my experience or determine my peace. Joel would add something crucial here that changes how you see the practice. When you successfully impersonalize attacks from loved ones, you actually free them from the dynamic. Your refusal to engage at that consciousness level, your refusal to absorb their poison and throw it back, creates space for them to shift if they're capable. Not always, not guaranteed, but often. Your consciousness work removes the energetic dynamic that was sustaining the conflict pattern. Advanced practitioners face another challenging scenario, attacks that seem completely justified by your actual mistakes. What if you genuinely did something wrong? What if the criticism is objectively valid? Joel's answer might surprise you profoundly. Impersonalization applies even when you've made genuine mistakes, perhaps especially then, because that's when you're most vulnerable to absorbing poison. Valid criticism still doesn't need to be personalized into your consciousness as identity. You can fully acknowledge your error, make appropriate amends, and change your behavior going forward without taking poison into your consciousness. The mistake was an action in time, not your eternal identity. The criticism reveals the other person's response and consciousness, not ultimate truth about your worth as a spiritual being. Joel made a crucial distinction between accepting responsibility and accepting condemnation. You take full responsibility for actions and their consequences. You make repairs where possible. You learn and grow. But you don't accept the consciousness of shame, guilt, unworthiness, or being fundamentally flawed. Those are human additions to simple fact, not spiritual truth about your divine identity. This practice actually makes genuine apology and real change far more possible. When you're not defending a wounded ego or protecting a shaky sense of worth, you can see your errors with clarity and address them effectively. When criticism doesn't threaten your core identity, you can receive the valid information it contains without the poison of condemnation that blocks growth. The most advanced application Joel taught is impersonalizing attacks on your spiritual understanding and practice itself. These are the most dangerous attacks because they're not aimed at your body, emotions, or reputation. They're aimed at undermining the very consciousness work that's been transforming your life and giving you freedom from suffering. When people mock your spiritual beliefs, ridicule your practices as delusion, undermine your spiritual authority, or insist you're wasting your life on fantasy, something deeper is being challenged than surface opinions. These attacks trigger existential fear that maybe you are deluded, maybe you are wasting your time, maybe you're following false teaching that's leading you away from reality. Joel said these spiritual attacks come precisely when you're making genuine progress and something wants desperately to stop it. The attacks reveal that your consciousness shift is threatening to other consciousness levels. People operating from purely material consciousness feel threatened by spiritual consciousness and attack it reflexively. The impersonalization here requires recognizing that attacks on spiritual truth are never about the truth itself, which is eternal and untouchable. Divine reality cannot be attacked by human opinion. Only human consciousness believing itself separate from God can feel threatened by spiritual teaching and attack it. The attack reveals the attacker's consciousness level and fear, not truth about spiritual principle or your path. Joel practiced this constantly throughout his ministry. His revolutionary teachings were attacked viciously by traditional religion claiming he was heretical, by materialists insisting he was delusional, by other spiritual teachers feeling competitive. He never defended himself. He never attacked back. He recognized each attack as human consciousness operating at that level, and continued teaching calmly from established spiritual consciousness. The final advanced scenario is collective attack, when groups turn against you, when social media mobs form, when entire communities reject you. This tests impersonalization at the deepest possible level because the sheer overwhelming volume of attack feels crushing and the total isolation feels unbearable. Joel taught that collective attack is still impersonal consciousness, just expressed through multiple channels simultaneously. A million people operating from the same consciousness level doesn't make that consciousness true or powerful. It remains human belief, regardless of how many humans believe it simultaneously. Your work stays exactly the same. Impersonalize, establish one power, witness, and bless. In these intense scenarios, practical action becomes especially crucial. You might need to step completely away from social media, leave communities, reduce public exposure while you stabilize your consciousness in truth. Impersonalization doesn't mean subjecting yourself to ongoing assault. It means not carrying the poison internally while you take wise protective action externally. We've journeyed together from complete misunderstanding of eye for an eye to profound spiritual truth that can revolutionize your entire life. You now understand with clarity that this wasn't a revenge doctrine but a consciousness principle describing spiritual law. You receive back into your experience the exact consciousness you hold within yourself. Attack consciousness experiences attack. Immune consciousness experiences protection. You've learned Joel Goldsmith's specific techniques in detail. Immediate recognition of all attacks as impersonal consciousness, absolute refusal to absorb poison, establishing spiritual truth firmly, practicing one power principle, developing witness consciousness, and blessing attackers. You've seen real transformation stories proving beyond doubt these principles work consistently when practiced faithfully according to Joel's instructions. You understand the challenges you'll inevitably face and exactly how to overcome them through commitment. You know this isn't passive acceptance of abuse but empowered response from spiritual consciousness rather than wounded ego. You recognize that your only work is maintaining your consciousness at truth level, regardless of external circumstances, that consciousness will eventually transform. The teaching hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years is now fully revealed to you. Eye for an eye describes the perfect law of consciousness mirroring itself. Tooth for a tooth describes receiving exactly what you project from within. When you understand this completely, you gain power over your experience that nothing external can ever take from you, and you become truly free. If your understanding of this ancient teaching has been completely transformed by Joel Goldsmith's revelation, like this video so more people discover this life-changing wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness principles that create real transformation, and comment, "I am spiritually immune," to declare your commitment to living from this new consciousness level.